Welcome, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining me for another episode of Talking Cloud. Now, this is where we talk about cloud. All things, anything cloud. And holy moly, man, it's amazing. I cannot recall a conversation that doesn't include cloud, something cloud this, cloud that, and certainly cloud security, cloud breaches. The bad guys are using it to really exploit us. We're seeing ransomware and phishing and all kinds of attacks just exploding, all happening in the cloud. Now, you've heard me say it many, many times. I am no expert, but man, I know how to hunt them down. Fortunate for, having no hair and being in the biz for a while. I just had the wonderful pleasure of working with some amazing and really, really smart people. And boy, we've got an awesome one today. So I met Venkat. I'm going to go and take a look through his profile. If you look, the guy's, he's quite impressive, to say the least, just because of his long tenure. And, rather than me trying to go through the long list of experience, board member, board observer, strategic advisor, and that's more current. Let's go back. The guy, director, product management, went to program director, security segment strategy and products. And this was back at the beginning of the millennia, IBM. 5 years then in other roles, director engineering and advanced threat research, IBM. Then on to Blue Coat, where I had the wonderful pleasure of working with him and getting to know him. There, I think his final role at Symantec was Senior Vice President, Corporate Development and Strategy. Then back at IBM doing some cool stuff that I want to hear about at the Watson Research Center. Then on to strategic advisory roles, board observers roles, on as a venture operating partner at BGV, and we're about up to current now. And I'm so thrilled to have with me Venkat. Man, Venkat, it's awesome to see you, have you here, and I'm really, really excited to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Grant.
So, hey, before I dive in and we start talking about some interesting stuff from my notes, take a minute and just talk a little bit more, expand that Z-axis, if you will, on your career, because, all I did is just read off a bunch of bullets as I cruised by. Maybe you can provide some perspective.
Yeah, sure. I've been primarily fascinated by the security industry for a long time, and I had the privilege of building products for the pre-cloud era, and then on the cloud with Blue Coat, and then of course now it's cloud native. So I'm kind of dating myself here, but there are sort of almost 3 generations of technologies that I've been part of, and it's always inspiring and very motivational to see how much our industry has changed dramatically in the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
But still, the same problems remain. So
is that really true? Perspective. As we went through these iterations, it's funny. I was talking to a guy, Venkat, who was talking about a 3090, right? The big mainframe. And he says, that was the original cloud. So I'm curious, how do you see the cloud in terms of those iterations? What's made that first iteration different than cloud native? Although I know the word, maybe I just want to hear your view on it. And then I really want to hear about why the problems are the same and what you think they are.
Yeah, I think the kind of the broader context has always been the business, right? The digital transformation. The business is always changing, and for different eras. 20 years ago, it was for the Java, for the e-business era that I was part of, and then when cloud came along, it pioneered a whole new set of business models. And now it's a digital native business model. So it's a business model that drives security, and now in these days, it's all about speed and agility and dynamic ways to get your products to your customers. And certainly this was well underway before COVID. And so COVID has pulled ahead 3-4 years of demand into the current years. So there's a massive pressure for digital transformation, acceleration of digital initiatives. Everything is digital now. So that's caused tremendous amount of pressure on IT organizations, cloud organizations, security organizations to react to that, to have a fabric by which they can deploy new business models, and we're taking appropriate risk and mitigation around it in the cloud environment. So the problem has changed in the sense that the speed of a cloud is, we have never seen this before. Back in the day, we were used to change management, where things used to go through an approval cycle of several months. These days, it's not gone. Automation has massively transformed our ability to go faster with the developers and digital products. So I think in some sense, the industry is reacting to the change of speed and velocity of business initiatives.
So you said, but the problems were the same. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think if you look at security, fundamentally, it sort of really starts with prevention, because this is the one thing you can control. Customers can control how they implement preventive techniques and controls in their environment. They don't control that much what happens outside, attacks and whatnot, but they can control their access and prevention around. So, fundamentally, it's the same problem of access control in the cloud. If you look at the more recent attacks, whether it's security breaches, ransomware, and data exfiltration, what's common is there is some access, there is some initial access that attackers gain, and then through that they're able to then elevate their credentials or privileges to get to the crown jewels, which is data. So in some it's the same problem. It's the same motivation for attackers. And so being able to fortify access control for the new modern era of cloud and cloud native, that's a big problem, and that's a big challenge for customers.
Yeah. Well, and the game is it's so different. And I'm dating myself when I go back and I just really think about access as we talk about it, right? And the acceleration, as you were talking about that earlier, I was recalling how drastically different the process of just procuring something, how it's changed, right? That whole, it's instantaneous now. You don't wait for anything. But it's remarkable how today, when you talk about access, it used to mean if you have one. Now everybody has one, and everyone that has one is connected to everyone. So how has that changed the access landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question, Grant. Fundamentally, if you look at the cloud itself, everything in the cloud is an identity. And that's the first recognition. We used to always deal with the users and their identities, and we have fairly good techniques and practice for that for the last 20 years. But what's changed in the cloud is all about the non-human identities. So your machines, your databases, your snowflakes, your Salesforce, your APIs, they all have some identity. They have some credential, and they all need a credential because they are similar to human beings. Or creating, reading, updating, deleting data in your environments. So these identities are massive. And so the kind of word I use is the modern cloud is littered with identities, hundreds, if not thousands of identities, and they're changing all the time. So how do you kind of create an operational environment where these identities are having the right level of access? They're able to, you're able to provide some governance around it, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, once if it's a human identity, you can review, you can provide access reviews, you can check that access, you can revoke that access.
Yeah.
But if it's a machine or an API or a database, that's a permanent access that you're giving to a very powerful entity. So the first thing is identity game has changed dramatically in the cloud, and that's the first kind of big problem. I would say the second big problem is the massive movement of data. Data is pouring into these cloud platforms, coming out of the data centers. And so, and because of the previously mentioned digital initiatives, and so now developers can spin up databases in 30 seconds, and they can build applications and microservices. So identities are now having enormous access to what? To the what is the data. This is your databases, your object stores, your elastic block storage volumes, your NoSQL databases, data warehouses, on and on. So there is a kind of the duality of identities and data, and they are powerful, kind of flywheel effect. The more data gets into the cloud, the more it excites developers to build very interesting applications. And more of these applications get built, the more identities they create, and you need to manage and govern. So that's a huge problem that we've never seen before in the kind of the old data center world.
And so, in your opinion, I'm wondering, does the seemingly constant push for automation combined with AI, which we know is just, algorithms with access to more data, right? They get more and more refined. But this leads to even more complication because those identities, applications, microservices, are now having an instruction or an access from a part of an automation process, part of a operational process. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is this was kind of managed by human processes. This would be much easier to deal with. Now, if you look at what's happening on the developer side, it's DevOps, it's infrastructure as code, it's CI/CD pipelines. The best organizations deploy multiple software builds every day. And so, multiple product releases every day. So so things are getting into the cloud through automation primarily. And this automation, as these things are being automated, these identities are being created on the fly. And in many cases, it's basic templates. Nobody checks for these identities and their privileges. Usually, it's the most expansive access that is provided as part of these automation.
Well, it's the easiest, right? I mean, if I'm a programmer, I can just put in the old proverbial asterisk, right? The star.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at developers, their primary motivation is shipping code, and that's how they measure. That's how digital transformation measured. So they do the best they can to manage security. At the end of the day, they want to get their products out to their customers, and they want to go faster. So this is the big change that's happening. This automation of infrastructure, automation of applications, microservices, automation of data infrastructures, and the DevOps, all these kind of programmatic ways to deploy applications. They are massively increasing the attack surface for identities and access, and quite frequently, this pushes the risk, access risk, big time on the operation side. So the conventional ways we're doing things are not working because we have never seen an environment like this. So we got to react to this, and we have to reimagine new ways of access control, new ways of operationalizing access in this environment. And these are some of the things that we're working on.
So, one of the things that we know, I mean, Checkpoint and I mean, virtually, it's amazing how massive this space has become. And I'm talking about posture management, right? I mean, I think demonstrable of how massive the total addressable market is the unbelievable number of players that have all got in and say they do some form of posture management, the granddaddy, I would say, being Dome 9. But it's stratified into so many different areas now, with identity and CIEM and all these other facets of this process. And I even know of friends that have startups in the shift left space where they're interrogating code before it gets pushed, right, to make sure there isn't any wild cards in there. But how is what you're talking about different than that in terms of operationalizing access and how you're looking at the problem?
Yeah, I think fundamentally there's a realization that the first generation of tools you mentioned, posture management tools, are good tools, but they're really at the infrastructure level, at the resource level. They give you a certain level of baseline compliance against things like CIS and whatnot. But if you look at really the digital transformation in imperatives and developer imperatives, it's all about identity and data. Because at the end of the day, they're building and deploying new applications and new microservices. So in the cloud and the cloud native world in particular, there's always a dynamic relationship between identity and data. It changes all the time.
Yeah.
And right. And so there is no resourcing there. And there are identities, your microservices, your APIs, your service accounts, your PaaS and SaaS. They all have access to the data. So you need to understand how these identities, how do they connect to the data? So one hand, we have all the identities, right? Your Kubernetes environments, your Lambdas, your Salesforce, your web servers, your Jenkins pipeline, admins, and all those things. On the other hand, you have data, which is all about your S3 buckets, Google BigQuery, RDS, MongoDB, Snowflake, on and on. And developers are building very interesting dynamic applications. So there's one word I can use to describe the change. It is dynamic. Let's go back to the discussions we had before. Infrastructure is dynamic. It changes all the time.
Right.
Your applications and software are dynamic. Why? Because of CI/CD pipelines and DevOps practices. Your data is dynamic because data is being pushed from your on-prem data center to your cloud environments. Okay, and these changes of dynamic infrastructure, dynamic applications, and dynamic data, they drive dynamic permissions, dynamic privileges, dynamic configurations.
Yep.
In many cases, it's very difficult to observe and get visibility to what these things are. So we are pioneering a new startup called Stack Identity, and we are defining a new space called AccessOps. We think that we need to reimagine how we operationalize access. So we work with the tools that you described before, Grant, posture management, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, we're into a world of dynamic access control, context-based access control. And this is because there's a dynamic relationship between identity and data. And if you understand that, and if you keep that in perspective, if you understand those relationships very clearly, then you get better visibility to your risks. You can start to then remediate and get early warnings on high-risk activities, the pathways, permissions, and whatnot, and ultimately you're able to prevent these things. So this new area is what we call as AccessOps, which is a way to operationalize access in a cloud-native way.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I've heard so many times. I'm just curious how this is going to be different because, I was just reading an article this morning and it's talking about alerts. Alerts. I mean, in the cybersecurity team, it's spam that always gets through. No filter can stop it, right? So I'm curious, is this going to just be a whole nother barrage of alerts that I'm going to have to contend with? How are you addressing that issue of just too many alerts?
Yeah, let's step back for a second here. We've built great products over the last 10 years or so, right? And a lot of products are based on alerts. And these products came from an area of resource-centric security, infrastructure security. And they didn't really have to contend with some of the relationship we're talking about here. So alert-based systems are a byproduct of lack of context, lack of relationship. And so what we've done with AccessOps is to really understand why something is happening. And why is that access between an identity and particular database, for example? And so by understanding the context and the relationship between these identities and data, you essentially establish a source of truth and evidence that is indisputable. And only by establishing relationship and context, you're able to reason about why something is happening. And that's why with AccessOps, it's not about false positives. It's all about understanding and providing the reasoning-based picture to teams who care about security. It could be the SecOps teams, the IAM teams, or the DevOps teams. And so we really want to make sure that we're building a product that is not alert-based, but it's context-based and relationship-based. The way to do that is to kind of build a ground truth evidence of all the access and all the touch points to data. And if you present that in a very usable, consumable way, and then teams understand why something is happening, they're able to connect A to B and B to C. And when they do that, they're able to better understand why something is happening, where are the risky touch points to data. Because many cases, for example, we found on the Capital One breach, it's never the initial access. There is always initial access to some service A compromised service A, and then A talks to B, B talks to C. And so, there's a way in which attackers land on these compromised access, and then they're able to elevate their way. So this is all about relationship. And the cloud is all about relationship. So we have understood the relationship between data and applications and infrastructure. Therefore, we're able to provide a high degree of fidelity about context and evidence that allows customers to really pinpoint exactly what the root cause of the problems are and take a proactive and preventive action. And that's a big change here.
And so you're able to reason. You said, the arbiter of truth is what, I was thinking, the source of truth. How do you let me know, how is it that you inform me that there's a problem? You say, hey, you've got these all chattering to every piece. What's the process you go through to inform the administrator? And then obviously that follow on is, how do you help me fix it?
Yeah. So imagine, Grant, you are the security administrator or the security professional.
Okay.
And so you went to bed.
Hang on. That's going to take some work. I got to really imagine that. You used professional in that sentence. Go ahead.
You
Sorry.
went to bed last night, right? And you got up this morning. So, the last 12 hours, your teams in Asia Pacific have been working, and your environment has changed. People have pushed dynamic new infrastructures now in your cloud, new apps in the cloud. And let's say you're responsible for identity and access management or permissions, or you're on the SecOps team. So you're looking at what did change in the last 12 hours? And how do I get visibility to that? And did any of these changes weaken or compromise my access control? So when you log into our tool, Stack Identity, and AccessOps builds in a very nice graph. It tells you, compared to the last time you looked at it, here are the things that are happening. Here's all the new infrastructures, your new applications, and your new data that are shown up on the cloud, and there are risks in some of these deployments, and we're able to clearly create attribution. Hey, here are the top 3 things that are concerning to us, because they don't violate your best practices. They violate your best practices, and here are the top things. So we are really providing a contextual way to look at things in the cloud that are changing all the time and bring you the real-time visibility into what's happening in the cloud to you. So at a glance, you can look at all the relationships between your critical crown jewels, what applications are touching them, what identities are touching them, and identify what are the risks. Are these risks of data being unencrypted, or the risks of highly elevated permissions, poor configurations? Is it because some vulnerable application showed up and it's compromising our access? So all these things that are be showing automatically, and we're doing all the heavy lifting in the background. So whether you log in, you have the clean ground truth evidence, you have the reasoning logic behind this. At that point in time, we give you time back to focus on the top threats and give you time back to take action right away. Within the product, we have automation built in. Either we can assist the user or we can automate, and we can immediately take the actions on the immediate urgent risks. But not only that, we can start to figure out, why did this happen? Is it because developers are pushing new environments that are not compliant to our policies, and help the developers understand, and show them visibly what's going on, and help them better at this. And only by sharing data and evidence are they going to buy into your environment and your logic. And then through that, essentially, there's a partnership between security teams, your peers in DevOps, and your peers in CloudOps, and together, not only are you able to identify the immediate risks to take action, but also understand systematically, can you build better security practices that you can shift left, and also make sure developers are aware of this as they build new infrastructure, new applications. They understand the responsibility and able to implement those policies.
Got it. Wow. So I'm thinking to myself, that's got to have some pretty deep roots to get all of that context. I mean, there's so many different things to consider: the routes, the access, the permissions. So, how do you go? Is it an agent-based solution? Do I have to install stuff? How does that work?
We are a SaaS platform, and so there are no agents, there are no schema changes, nothing. We require the ability for us to get a small read-only access to your cloud environment, where we can discover your resources and we can put all the relationships together. And what we really understand well is patterns. The cloud is a bunch of patterns, and so these patterns allow us to recognize and focus on the most important risks around access and data.
Yeah.
So it's not about scanning a million resources in the cloud, but to what purpose? The purpose we are offering is to make sure that we're looking at access risks as the top risk. And we are not the only people saying it. If you look at CISA, if you look at today's OWASP top 10 recommendations, the 2021, they point out access control is a big issue. If you look at the most recent report from the Verizon DBR report, it talks about access control. This is the top risk. And we're looking at the risks to your data, which is where the biggest digital transformation is happening. So by be able to bound the identity and data together, and looking at access risks, in a complete holistic view, we're able to provide a complete ground truth evidence, and a set of automation approaches to contextual policies and automation to help teams who care about security get on top of this.
Got it. Sounds really cool. Can you? Are you guys out now? When are you coming out of stealth? What's your timeline? Can you share any details?
Yeah, sure. We are working very aggressively with our design partners. We've done more than 100 plus customer validations on the AccessOps concept. We think we're very unique in the industry, the way we think about operationing AccessOps. I mean, think about it. Everything in the cloud has changed. Yeah. Right. From identities to automation as code to DevOps CI/CD, everything has changed, and yet access has not changed one bit. It's the same. So customers using the same tools built for the data center world, in the cloud native world, and that doesn't work. So we have to reimagine access. Yep. And the way we're thinking about this is AccessOps. So we are actually in stealth mode, but stay tuned, Grant. In a couple of months, we're going to make some announcements coming out of this, and I think we're on a fairly exciting journey.
AccessOps, I just I just saw last Friday, I think, a post or an article where it said rev ops, like revenue ops, right? So many people are thinking about the operationalization of these things that they haven't necessarily thought about operationalizing. But and one of the things I was commenting on is, when you were talking about everything's changed, what's remarkable to me, Venkat, is how fast so much has changed. Right? I mean, we know Moore's law is just continuing to forge ahead at even an accelerated rate. We know this, but it's in so many different aspects of our lives, and certainly within cloud and cloud computing. KubeCon's going on, all the stuff that's happening, and it's remarkable to me. But this really kind of resonates with me, this idea that, because I've been saying for a while, everything is going to have an identity. Everything, and you have to change the way you think about it. So I think AccessOps really, at first blush anyway, in this feeble brain, I'm thinking that makes a lot of sense. How do you think this is going to evolve? Just kind of if we got out the crystal ball and said, Venkat, where do you see AccessOps in, a year, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, if you can look back a bit historically, right? If you look at DevOps, 10 years ago, DevOps has revolutionized how we today build and deploy applications, right?
Yeah.
This is unbelievably how we have transformed the velocity of how we build applications and deploy applications, which is why the Kubernetes is powering a new era of orchestration of these application environments. In a similar way, if you fast forward cloud, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of identities in the cloud. We are just at the very early inning of the cloud native movement, if you will, or the era, if you will. Then you multiply this by hundreds of permissions on each resource or each identity. And then you multiply by all the pathways. People want to get at the data, right? People are going to have hundreds of or even thousands of databases in the cloud, and so this combination becomes very complicated to manage unless you reimagine how you're trying to operationalize access. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is you also cannot constrain development teams. They have to go fast, and that's the whole advantage of being first to market with these digital initiatives. So we're looking at an attack surface that is a multiplication of identities times the number of pathways to your number of data sources.
Right.
And so there's a vast thing. So I reckon that AccessOps will become a kind of new way of looking at how do we manage access to all your sensitive resources without slowing DevOps,
right,
and providing a self-service way by which we can scale this, because we can't have human beings sit behind the console and scale this. And so we thought about some of the other areas like DevOps, for example. There are data ops coming up. Now you mentioned RevOps. It's really about how do we operationalize and build a new set of competencies. So AccessOps is not just about technology; it's also about process. It's about people. It's about, of course, new tech.
Yep.
We are focusing on the new tech, but obviously we understand at the end of the day, it's about a new way for us to simplify customers to get a better control of their environments and manage the top risk, which is access.
So if I'm an organization, I'm just thinking I've already got a ticketing system, ServiceNow, something, do you see this? It seems like it makes sense for this to be integrated into that process. Somehow there's going to be hooks to allow me to tie that AccessOps into the other aspects of my operation.
Absolutely. AccessOps is a cloud native process and a set of workflows. And by definition, we want to we're building this on top of existing investments that customers already have made. They made investments, and for example, if it's AWS, they're building a lot of this access control on AWS IAM or Okta, for example, or Ping Identity.
Right.
Or they're using, for their automation response, they're using ServiceNow or Jira. So they're, or Slack.
Right.
So we have to kind of understand the idea is to kind of provide a process and a set of workflows that provides the more real information, ground truth evidence, and then integrate that into the customer's tool chain of choice, whatever the tool chains might be. So initially, it's going to be the operational side, but ultimately, this also has to go on the DevOps side. So we have to integrate this with some of the shift left, DevSecOps kind of paradigms emerging. So ultimately, it's about information. It's about looking at your access data and taking informed decisions proactively, and ultimately establish a baseline by which you want to run your organization. Right. And that's the whole part of AccessOps is you cannot keep on chasing your own tail. You understand how your environment is working, how your developers are building applications, what kind of risk you're able to take, and then provide all these things contextually. Understand, the risks that you can immediately take action against to prevent ransomware attacks and exploitation attacks. More importantly, codify these best practices in a way the rest of the teams can observe this and take it and put this into action.
So how will you inform me that, I've got an app that's off the reservation? I mean, is there some quick method for me to know where the big rocks are, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways we can notify. Since we're working this on the background, anytime, it's a real-time system. We continue to, AccessOps runs all the time. And when it produces information of note, we're not going to send you, information, notifications every 2 seconds.
Right.
When there's material risks to your data, then you get notified through email or through Slack or through an automation mechanism or through your service ticket constructs, your in the future mobile apps, right, whatever that might be. We want to kind of again meet the customer where they are. That's our core philosophy. If they're already in their environments, we meet them, and we meet the practitioner where they are. And ultimately, the goal is to make sure that we are able to amplify their productivity, their information need, and get them on top of the problem, and not have them go down kind of rabbit holes and figure out what's going on with all the false positives.
Yeah.
On the alert chasing that's happening today in our environments today.
Right. Sounds awesome, man. I mean, very, very cool stuff. Sounds, I've said before, and it's one of the things I really do love so much about this industry is no matter when you get into it, you're getting in at the beginning of something, right? And this certainly is a big beginning, the cloud, right? Because it's relatively young compared to, I think, where we're going to be going. So, talk a little bit more about kind of, how one of the things that just blows me away, some stats, Venkat. I know you know this already, but the increase we've seen in ransomware, in phishing, in just overall data loss. The statistic I heard in 2020, there were more data records lost than the previous 15 years combined. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling. And what's exacerbating that is the fact that we're just constantly creating more and more and more records and more data. So how do you think this is going to shift the balance on that a little bit? Is this a way to chip away at that massive rock?
Yeah, I think in our current course, I got news for you. It's going to get worse, it's just because the transformation is just underway. As data is pouring into these cloud platforms. But there is a method. For example, when you look at AccessOps, one of the founding principles we thought about is, I've been in the industry many, many years, and I think the things that I think we have sort of have not done really well as an industry is we are not focused on the things we could control, which is prevention. For a number of years, we went down the compliance angle, we went down the detection angle, and they're all good tools, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, right, the things you can control, you can actually implement this, right? I mean, look at CISA.gov. They put out a quote: "Prevention is the most effective defense against ransomware."
Yeah.
It is critical to follow best practices to protect against ransomware attacks, and this is so true. Now, the challenge is how do we help customers implement these best practices and prevent these attacks?
Yep.
So we have shifted the game from just detection and monitoring to prevention.
Right.
Because we can get on the prevention side. You're right. This is going to be unabated for a while.
Yep.
And every day you're worse off than the day before.
Yep.
So the way to kind of get on the prevention side is to really understand context, understand the patterns that are causing the most egregious risks, okay, and automate these risks away.
Right.
So the same techniques that today drive cloud automation, things like, for example, policy as code, for example. So
right.
There are ways to get there, but it's almost the mentality is sort of really, understand, and we kind of call it the desired state. Establish your desired state.
Right.
Which is really a set of policies.
Yep.
And let us do the work for you. Let products like AccessOps and techniques, work for the customer's behalf, where we move the discussion to prevention.
Yeah.
And if you prevent, then you get control. A lot of things are not going to happen in the environment. And so one of the more of the idealistic goals is for us to kind of change the conversation from simply attacks and detections to prevention.
Yeah.
And we have taken the domain of access control as our primary domain and dimension of prevention. And if we can take and manage access effectively, operationalize access controls effectively in this cloud native world, in this new world of data, the data cloud world, then we can start to make some dent into the gap you're talking about.
In my mind, it's a simple one, Venkat, but it's without access, that's a surefire way to prevent, right? So, I mean, those go tightly together. And I must also say, Checkpoint, my employer, has for as long as they've been around, their position has been prevention, not detection. And certainly the advancements in technologies and the speed of bandwidth, capacity, right, storage, it's helped us move the threat. That's one of the great things about the cloud is if we are effective at protecting you, we can do it in the cloud before it gets to you. And now with today's bandwidth, it's going to be okay because you won't even really notice, right? And we're seeing that with sandboxing technologies, right? Where you click on a page and it's getting delivered somewhere else first just to make sure you're okay. And then you'll get it and you notice a little bit of a hiccup, but it's not too bad. And I think that's what's so critical, because I don't know about you, man, but I can't outrun a microprocessor. When it was just characters eating up my letters on my screen, detection was okay. We're in a different world today. It's got to be prevention. So I think that is spot on. So this has been very interesting, very enlightening. If you don't mind, if you can share, how could somebody get a hold of you? I'm no Ron Burgundy, but, I'm trying to get some people listening. If we have anybody that hears this concept, wants to learn more, how do they get a hold of Stack Identity?
Yeah, we are in stealth mode right now. So in about a couple of months, we'll be public. But right now, if this is really exciting to you, if you agree with the problem, please, you can send an email to info@stackidentity.com. It's one word.
Yeah.
My name is Venkat Raghavan. You can also email me directly. It's Venkat, Venkat, @stackidentity.com.
Okay.
And we'll love to hear from you. And I think, Grant, it's been a phenomenal discussion, and it's always very, thoughtful and very provoking as well. And I think, kind of really be blessed to be part of a very small journey here, and great to be part of this your podcast. So appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, I really appreciate you, and I got to just throw a plug in for us on Talking Cloud. This is a first. We've never done video, but we're giving it a shot, and we'll hopefully be able to publish some of this as well. So Venkat, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Remember, it's Venkat at stackidentity.com. You can hit him up, or info at, and thanks all very much. If you like what you're hearing, be a part of the conversation. Let us know, share it, tell your friends, subscribe, and we'll look forward to having you back on the next episode of Talking Cloud. Thanks so much.
Yeah.